Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. My name is Duane. I'm your host, and we are on to another episode. So today, my guest is Andy Mills, and he is a reporter and podcast producer. He's done such shows as The Daily, Rabbit Hole, Caliphate, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. He spent much of his career working at NPR and the New York Times. And he has gone on to create his own independent podcast called Reflector. And he did an episode on that show called The Sea Change. And the question he asked is, why aren't Americans embracing the most promising medications for treating overdrinking? And on that episode of Reflector, he shares the story of his friend who was dealing with alcohol dependence and was able to use naltrexone and the Sinclair Method to overcome their issues with alcohol, and explores the whole topic of why aren't these medications more available to everyone? Why isn't everybody using them? And where is this sea change in addiction treatment that they all thought were coming? On this episode, Andy's going to talk about how he came to create this episode, how the story came together, why he felt it was so important to tell, and just his process and thoughts of doing this work. It's a great conversation about this process and this topic, and I definitely would encourage you to check out the episode on the Reflector called The Sea Change. I think you'll get a lot out of listening to that, and I hope you get a lot out of listening to this episode as well. So stay tuned for that. If you are enjoying the Addicted Mind podcast, you're getting a lot out of it, please rate and review us in whatever podcast app you're using right now. It really does help the podcast get found, and I really appreciate it. And don't forget, if you want to continue the conversation online, join our Facebook group. Just go to Facebook, type in the Addicted Mind podcast, and click join. All right, everyone, let's start this episode. All right, everybody, welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. I am excited for our guest today, Andy Mills. You are a journalist. I love all of your work that you've done.
Thank you, Duane.
You've got a new project out there called Reflector.
I do.
And there's an episode on there that we're going to talk about today about alcohol addiction and alcohol treatment and the use of medications to help with that. So, Andy, why don't you jump in and just start telling us a little bit about you, and we'll get into this topic.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, especially to talk about this, something I really care about. So a bit about me. I'm a journalist, like you said, and I focus largely on storytelling journalism, narrative journalism. The briefest version of my background is that I originally went to university to become a Christian minister after feeling the call in my teen years. But while studying to be a minister, I started to just see how much bigger the world was than my own thin sliver of a perspective, and meeting people of sincere faith who believed in other religions. And I was no longer very interested in a profession where I told people what they should think or tried to convince them to believe like I did. And I became fascinated with how we shape our beliefs, why people believe anything that they believe. And that eventually led to journalism. And I like to joke that this is a great job for people who are a little nosy and who really like other people, because essentially my job is to follow my curiosity, to spend time with people whose life's experiences are different than mine, and just try to really pay attention, ask the right questions, and help to draw out a compelling story. And I've worked at NPR, I worked at Radiolab, I worked at the New York Times for years. I helped them start their audio department, including their daily podcast, The Daily. I've also made a bunch of different multi-part podcast series, Rabbit Hole, which examined the influence the internet is having on how we form our beliefs now. Most recently, I did a big series called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling with my friends Matt and Megan, where we looked at how we looked essentially at how difficult public debates have gotten, even between people who see themselves largely as allies. And I'm out now with this new show called Reflector. And essentially we tell each episode a different story, and we lean into the messiness. You know, one of our mottos comes from one of my friends, but also journalistic heroes, John Ronson. And he has this great quote that if you fill your head with judgment, there's no room for curiosity. And we like to tell a story that on its surface it's good reporting, it's very interesting, but that has at a subtext, it has like bigger ideas that are in the room, even if they're never quite said. And yeah, in this first episode, we look at, essentially it's the story of a friend of mine who really struggled to control her drinking for years and years over COVID, got desperate for help. Like so many people, COVID really increased the amount she was drinking, the COVID lockdowns, being isolated, having the loss of her routine. And then she stumbles into the Sinclair Method and the use of the medication naltrexone. It really ends up working for her. And then she becomes curious why it took YouTube and the internet to introduce her to this thing that ended up helping. And so there's this larger mystery about like the power of social norms, why we're not embracing more different expressions of alcohol treatment and addiction treatment in general.
I was going to say, you know, when you're talking about this, as you're laying all this out, what's really interesting is that undercurrent of skepticism that you developed as you moved through that process of like, you know, I'm going with my own beliefs, and to really start to ask questions about, does this work? Does this not work? Why are we going this way or that way? Why do that?
No, I mean, it is a profound thing to believe in something so deeply that it becomes your unifying identity, and that you dedicate your life to this one belief, and then to realize that you might be wrong. And I've been shaped by that. It wasn't like it happened in a day or a moment, but over those years that I was in seminary and in Christian college and studying the Bible and trying to dig deeper into the religious experience, not just my own, but others, I just started to realize like, wow, I'm wrong about some stuff. And I didn't mean to be. And how did and it definitely shaped me into an anti-fundamentalist. I don't want to be against holding beliefs. You know, it's this interesting balance. Like, how do you know if you believe the right stuff? How do you, the big question for the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling was, how do you know if you're standing up for what's right or if you're getting caught up in something? And I think about that a lot.
And it's hard to know that. I mean, I think that's where, I guess I would say that's where spirituality lies in a way, is that gray, that in between, that unknown. You know, to be able to put those pieces together, it's difficult. It's challenging. It's not clear. And I think that talks to kind of the episode that you just did, you know, about drug addiction treatment, alcohol addiction treatment, and some of our beliefs around that we hold on so tightly to, that maybe we need to be more flexible on.
Exactly. It's one of the undercurrents, I think, in all the work that I try to do. There's this media critic named Ben Smith, who I've become friends with over the years, although I haven't always gotten rave reviews from him. That's how you know he's honest, you know?
Yeah, there you go.
But he told me once that if you listen to all the work that I've ever put out, he said, I could sum it all up in one word: doubt. And I definitely, if I have a bias, it's not towards a political party. It's not towards I'm not anti or pro one treatment plan for addiction or another. But I do believe that doubt is our friend, and as frightening as it can be, it's also it in the end is more helpful, and it can be fun. There are parts of losing my fundamentalist beliefs that obviously were disorienting. But there was also a kind of a release of this burden, the burden of thinking that like my way was the right way and I had it all figured out. I think deep down I knew that wasn't true, and it was nice to say, actually, let's have some humility here, and let's try and look at the world with an open mind and with curiosity instead of trying to take everything and to fit it into something. And and when it comes to addiction, it is one of the interesting things is that, right now it feels almost like, this is what's interesting about your podcast and what you do. And it's the thing I really appreciate is that even the idea of being an addict, like, are you an addict or are you not an addict? Right. That I think we're realizing we can even move it out of the world of dependence upon certain substance. There is something about our culture that I feel like all of us feel like we're addicted to something. And it's this sense of powerlessness to do that which I don't really want to do, but I just keep doing it. And that mystery, that odd aspect of our human nature mixed in with this particular moment in society right now, it feels like urgent. And I think to understand it, we have to go into it with a curiosity and an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a saying that I like, and I can't exactly remember where I got it, but, beware the tyranny of the one right way. Mm-hmm. There's so many different options out there, and working in this field, I've seen it. I've seen this work for one person and not work for the next person. And it's really a personal journey that you got to go on to find your way. But going back to your other point that you're making about our society and culture at this time, I think we're beginning to see that. I think we're beginning to see in ways, especially with the new research and new things we understand about the brain, how little willpower we may have. That there's a lot going on that we don't understand about the decisions we think we make. And we have to be open to that. And that's where that doubt comes in and that curiosity comes in, I think, to help guide us in that journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, willpower is a whole other can of worms there, isn't it? Originally, this story ended with a big discussion about willpower because I did talk to all of the interview subjects, the researchers, the doctors, the journalists, my friend Katie, who was the guinea pig in this experiment. We all had in-depth conversations about willpower, and I tried to make that the ending, but it was just too much. It's too long. Like it's such big. Yeah. It's, when you start pulling on that thread, it's difficult. I will say, though, that once again, it goes back to this black and white thinking. There has been a mindset, some people call it the puritanical American mindset, that like you just need to get your act together, right? Like, you're drinking too much? Well, stop drinking and start being a responsible citizen, this is like, don't try and make an excuse for it. This isn't because of some trauma. This isn't because of whatever. Like, you're just making excuses. And I think we're all kind of, at this point, that feels outdated, unhelpful. But then there's almost a overreaction on the other side that says, no. None of this is your fault. There's nothing there's no willpower at all. You're just sick. And so we should just treat it like it's a sickness. And I don't think that that's quite true either. You have to show up to the meetings. Like, you do have to take, in this case, the naltrexone. It is a bit of a mix, and it's almost why we need community, why we need each other, because it's really hard to just muster all that up on your own. Like, you need the support. We're seeing, I know you know this, but the number one, when you go looking at the different profiles of people who have found their way out of addictions, and here I'm speaking specifically of chemical dependencies, drugs, alcohol, like one of the biggest factors is that there was some sort of outside support or pressure.
Yeah.
A job that you loved told you one more time and you lose it. It's like, woof, that helps. So having that, and then on the other side, having someone who's like, no, I'm driving us there now. Like, no, let's go on a walk instead. Let's having those things in place are still the most powerful forces in addiction treatment.
Well, we don't heal alone. That's the truth of it. We don't heal alone. We heal with the help of others. We all need it. And I think as a society, we need to realize that. I think coming up and holding each other up is, the best shot we got at making good lives for everybody. But I'm interested in what pulled you into this particular topic and pulled you into this story with your friend, because it speaks to this. It really does.
Well, I originally reported on this for Radiolab, the NPR show, in 2015, which is somehow that's 9 years ago. Are you aware that that was 9 years ago? That seems...
I know, that's crazy.
In my head, it's like, no, this is just a couple years back. And at the time, I was really excited not just to learn about, naltrexone and antabuse and all these new medications. Well, not necessarily new, but all these medications that were seeing success in these different studies and these different trials coming into the space of addiction. And this, as you'll recall, 2015 is right around the time where the opioid crisis was really starting to come front and center. We were just starting to realize how much of a toll this was going to have on society. And I think that when I, put out this reporting, it was alongside Gabriel Glazer's reporting in The Atlantic and a few other high-profile journalistic endeavors into this medium. And just so you know, in 2015, in that world, 2014, 2015, the New York Times didn't have an addiction reporter at the time. The Wall Street Journal didn't have an addiction reporter at the time. I don't think people were aware of what was coming. Yeah. And suddenly it was front and center. And I thought that we would see a sea change in how we treat people who were suffering from addiction, and that we would move into this understanding that each individual is coming with their own set of circumstances and symptoms, and we will look to individualize care to find out what sort of treatment might be most effective for what person. And so that was in 2015. I'm really excited about it all. So much has changed. Addiction's become a way bigger topic. There are addiction reporters all over the place at these big, powerful media institutions. I did some addiction reporting in the midst of that. I went to Ohio and I met with a group of friends who all became addicted to prescription painkillers when they were in high school. And out of the 10 friends, only 4 of them were still alive, and all 10 of them became addicted. And it was a really difficult story, very harrowing story. And what brought me to do this episode was essentially COVID. Ever since those COVID lockdowns happened, we've seen just a number of unintended consequences. And I'm interested in trying to look at and report out what those unintended consequences for society has been. And we now know that in the year 2020 to 2021, so that was during that first initial, what the heck is this virus? Everyone work from home, we'll figure it out, right? That in the year from 2020 to 2021, there was just a massive increase in the amount of alcohol we were drinking and the amount of people who were suffering from somewhere in the spectrum of overdrinking. And there was something like 178,000 alcohol-related deaths, which is more than opioids, more than all addiction, more than all drug overdoses combined. Something was going on there, and I wanted to understand it. I want to get into it more. And then my friend Katie was the person in my life who was trying to do something about it. And what's interesting is she's kind of a rarity. I don't know in your experience, but from my reporting, it is rare that somebody who's suffering from addiction decides just on their own without being told you might lose your job, or a spouse saying I might walk out, or without suffering some kind of big consequence and having that rock bottom moment. Without that, it often takes that, but she didn't really have that. She just kind of was haunted over COVID by how she was drunk all the time, and just fear that she was just going to never get out of it, and this would be her life, and she's going to led her to try this odd Sinclair Method treatment, and she found success. And so then I started to be okay, this is a story. I want to do this to help document my friend's journey and share that with people, to give it just a personal, intimate look into this. This isn't just studies and figures you read on the internet, but it's also a chance to say it's been 9 years and there really hasn't been a sea change. And that's interesting. And why?
Especially when we have this new research that's coming out that's showing that some of these medications are so incredibly helpful used in the right way. But I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, and we're talking about is that, that piece of, people get help when, something really bad happens and they hit rock bottom. But, my experience is there's so many people like your friend in this interview who are suffering in silence. They're trying on their own in some kind of way to get support. And there's so much shame and stigma around it that they hide it. And I really think it's wonderful that she was willing to kind of come out and share her story. But it sounds like for a lot of the time, it was hidden for her. She didn't share with anybody. She tried to do it in a way that's because of the shame and the stigma and all of that with addiction.
Well, this is one of the things that's so interesting about addiction reporting, and why I think it plays to my constitution, is that as soon as you start digging into it, you're really talking about shame. You're really talking about willpower. You're talking about the deepest, biggest mysteries of human behavior. And you don't have to just talk about it in general terms. I mean, I believe it was Washington University out of St. Louis that came out with a study in 2021 or 2022 that said that over the 18-ish, maybe 19 million Americans who struggle with overdrinking, only about 6% of them ever even mention it to their doctors.
Yeah.
They're ashamed to even tell the guy or gal who is paid to help them physically. They're so ashamed they don't even want to mention to the doctor. And of the percentage that do, only 1.6% of those people are ever even offered medications like naltrexone and these other things to try, right? They won't work for everybody, but that's the thing that I think I want to highlight with this reporting. Not just like there's a pill and it does this, there's a method, and some people say it's worked for them, but really it's trying to get to that, like the costs of living in a society that gets too ruled by the social norms around shame and embarrassment.
And that black and white thinking, yes or no thinking, even in our treatment modalities, this abstinence model, here, very popular in the United States. It's either this or that, and not looking at how everybody is so different in this.
Yeah.
It has to be a unique journey. But I think that also keeps us stuck too. This idea that the only way to really be sober, so to say, is to not use any medications whatsoever, because if you do that, then you're not really sober. And there's a whole mythology around that too, that I've heard as well. And the reluctance to try that, to see if that will work.
Right. And if I'm honest, I'm of many minds about it too, because when I think about the role that medications are playing in our society, on the one hand, I'm concerned. I got a tip one time from a mother. I believe her child was in second grade at this nice California private school. And she said that she had just found out that of the 25, 30 second graders in class with her child was one of only 2 or 3 that weren't on anti-anxiety or antidepressants in second grade.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, I grew up in a small town and suddenly found myself living in the New York media world. And I was around people who were raised very different, raised with a lot of money, people who had different life experiences. And I was surprised. Almost all of them were on anti-anxiety or antidepressants. And at one point, I remember asking a friend of mine, are you taking this medication because you believe you are ill and you need a drug to help you live healthy? Or are you just trying to take the edge off of life? And she's like, oh, I'm just taking the edge off of life. We're all just taking we have good insurance. We have money. Why won't you take the edge off of life? She just admitted it. And there's a part of me that goes, oof, we got too many pills out there. And so what, you're going to bring naltrexone? You're bringing another pill into this, right?
Yeah.
Then on the other side of my mind, I go, well, look at our society right now. We were mammals on the savannah. We were, hunters and gatherers. Most of the time we've been us. And now suddenly look at this life that we're living. Look at what we're doing for a job. Look at the isolation that we experience. Look at the loss of these kind of foundational traditions and practices that used to bring us together, maybe we're living so crazy right now that the only way to like functionally exist here is to add some medicine, is to like mess with the chemicals. We're messing with everything else. And that if maybe this is just the cost of the moment we're in, and we need to like move on and get through this to get somewhere else. And
it gets hard to follow. Like where is that space for each individual where they feel good in their life, where they feel like they're thriving. And I guess, every person has to be able to make that journey and
Right.
figure that out. And for some people, medication is going to be a cornerstone of that. And then other people, not so much. And finding that balance of, if I take too much of the edge off of life, then I'm escaping and avoiding life itself, and I'm going to miss out. But I also need to function. And that takes a lot of discernment.
And it's all messy and it's individuals make a difference. One of my cousins, she is bipolar, and when she's not medicated in this regimented way, it takes a toll. It just does. And it becomes really scary. And so for her, like maybe the best way for her to live is to just take these medications from now on. Right. Whereas with a lot of people, I had a rough time in 2018 where I felt that I could see myself falling into a kind of sadness that wasn't easily understandable, and started having these moments, panic and sweat. And my friends are like, I think you're having anxiety. And I'm like, I don't have that stuff. I'm not one of those,
I don't have anxiety. What are you talking about?
I was just like, this is just like you rich people. Like, oh, my anxieties. Like, I don't own any anxieties, right? Life is tough and I'm just barreling through. But then I did go see a therapist, and I found it really healing. And in the end, I didn't end up needing medication, but I did really benefit from the different kinds of therapy that I went through over the course of several months that alleviated that for me.
Getting the skills needed to regulate your own nervous system.
Right. And so in that case, it's like, was I sick and then I saw a doctor? Or our metaphors are they're tricky, and we should use them when they're helpful, and then we should avoid them when they're not. Because there's definitely, if you get into that mindset, or am I sick or am I healthy? It's almost like saying, am I an alcoholic or not? Well, I drink a lot, but I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. I'm nervous that those modes at times have been helpful. Like, I think that the power of the original founding of Alcoholics Anonymous and these 12 steps, I think over embracing the identity of an alcoholic and just like forcing oneself to reckon with that and to kind of live day by day. I do think that was and remains powerful. And so I don't want to see that with black and white, but I do think that like on a broader societal level, if we get too concerned with this binary thinking, am I or am I not, then I think that there's levels of healthiness that we're not achieving. Think about the people since COVID. We know these numbers. America has seen a massive increase in what we're drinking. I think they say we're at like 1960s level. So it's like I joke like we're back to Mad Men level drinking for those of us who drink.
Yeah,
and that doesn't mean everyone's become, everyone's life's got out of control. But I know a lot of people who started to have a glass of wine or two every night because, you know what, we're working from home, the world's ending, just going to be on the screen. Might as well.
What the hell?
And some of those people, it became like, I know because I've heard from them since this episode aired. Some of those people, their nightcap became that they drink 3 cocktails a night. Every night. Now, 3 cocktails a night is not going to ruin your life. It's not going to kill you. But the nights that they try to go to sleep without the 3 cocktails, they can't sleep. They're irritable. They argue with their spouse. They don't feel right. They're thinking about it all the next day. Is that person an alcoholic? Does that person need to go to an alcoholic meeting? I don't know. But that's not a healthy way to live. And
no.
Let's move out of trying to like
that, right?
Yeah. If we move away from me saying to my friend, you're drinking 3 cocktails a night and you're irritable when you don't, it's like the intervention moment, right? You're an alcoholic. You need to go to rehab. For me, one of the things about this story is that I'm like, well, you should definitely talk to your doctor about it. And you should probably look to intervene. You are not going to live as long or as prosperous as you want to live having that kind of a nightly dependency.
Yeah. When you were doing this episode and you're doing these interviews, what was it? What was it like? What were some of the things that were most striking to you that you saw in our culture, in our society as you're starting to dig into this material from an outside perspective? Because, I'm a treatment professional. I work in addiction.
You're in there.
I'm kind of surrounded by it, but that can blind my own thinking too, right? So someone who's not in the field looking at this from the outside.
Well, one thing that becomes clear, and it's different about addiction than other things that might ail us, is that oftentimes the drugs or the alcohol, they work as advertised. They actually feel really good. And that becomes a big part of the problem. It actually is joyful for a lot of people. And the after effects, the morning after, the withdrawal, none of that is there. But the actual high or buzz or drunk, intoxication, one of the troubles is that it works. It feels awesome for that time. It can for some people, parts of their personalities that are sometimes just stuck inside of them find their way free. And it's almost bigger than just the base dopamine pleasure. It's this is my true self. That I feel like I'm my truest self when I'm drunk. And therefore, it's really hard to quit this thing because I'm not just losing out on this, dopamic hit, this pleasure. I'm abandoning a part of my life's joy or a part of my identity that I like. And that is huge. It's really that's one of the things that's not clear to some people coming into it. I don't think I'd thought of that before I started reporting that it's that deep. It's not because, my connection, the only addiction I've ever had to overcome is cigarettes. And reporting on this and diving into it, I did realize that there were parts of quitting smoking that I didn't realize at the time, but makes sense now, is that one part is just you really crave it, right? That craving state.
Totally.
And there's amazing studies about the craving state. And the craving state's crazy because when you're in the craving state, it appears that your mind, and this better.
Yeah, narrowly focused on this one thing that doesn't want to let go of.
And it's like the fantasy mind. It's like, it's a version of that mind that when you break up with somebody and it was the right call, but then you're lonely and you're like, maybe things were good actually. And back, it's like it
was a great experience.
You're rewriting history to be like, no, actually, I was wrong. It was always good. But with cigarettes, that craving state is really strong. It's why people struggle so much to get over it. But there was also that other part where it's just like, I was a guy who smoked. I took smoke breaks. I wasn't somebody who was vain and cared about how I smelled or whatever. No, I was punk rock. I was a rock.
It was part of your identity. It's part of who you are. I think you talk about something really profound in what I see, especially when people are really working on their addiction and they're really letting it go, is there's a grief process that goes along with it when they really started to let go of it. I mean, I think there's definitely the desire to get out of the grips of it. But at the same time, like you said, there's this dichotomy there of this grief and loss that goes along with it. And, coming to terms with that, it's part of the process of healing this.
I love that you use the word grief. It's a really interesting way of thinking of it. I don't know who told me this, but somewhere along the way, some wise person in my life said, all change is death, and therefore all change can be mourned. Even the best change. Yeah. Even the change you've always dreamed of, it's okay to mourn a little bit around it. And I think that's helpful wisdom.
Yeah, it's a powerful statement.
I'm curious, I keep talking about the changes that have happened since COVID. Have you seen an increase in people who are seeking your professional services, seeking your wisdom on these things, have you seen an increase in addiction-like behavior or in the kind of isolation? What changes have you seen since COVID? Do you buy into this idea that our society is still kind of reeling in the after effects of it?
Absolutely. I what I see is a huge demand for mental health services. I mean, beyond even addiction, we're in a mental health crisis, and we don't know how to talk about it. We don't have the compassion to talk about it. Sometimes we can be very judgmental about it. And I think that's part of the issue. But I think COVID and everything that happened there was a collective trauma for our society that we're still figuring out. We're still in the grips of it. And I think we will recognize, maybe as we do in our lives, right? Society will recognize this as well. We still in it. So we don't know it all, but I think we can say, there's a lot of trauma here, a lot of collective trauma, I think, around the world over. And I think we're seeing that just spill out. But like when you bring it down to the person level, I think for the people who come into my office or come into my group practice, we're seeing the aftermath of all of it. We're seeing it. So definitely it's there, and it's hard to see it. But once again, I think the way we do anything about it is we create a compassionate space to be able to talk about it and to talk about these things like grief, loss, and that this is part of the human experience. When you talked about earlier about medicating away the human experience, we don't want to do that either, right? We have to move through it. Yeah. But it's a balancing act. It is so, it's difficult, but what I like to do and my philosophy is that each person comes in, they are their own expert, and they just need someone to listen and bring up counterpoints to them in a compassionate way and allow them to experience their experience without the addition of shame or judgment around it. And through that, that's, I think, where healing really happens. Like I would imagine in therapy, like you were saying, you go in there, like I'm the tough person, right? I don't have these problems. I don't have anxiety. What are you talking about? But you go into a safe space and you're actually able to express it. You're then able to get the skills needed because someone can hear you. You can walk through it. You can listen. You can contemplate, and you can get new information that you didn't know before that then helps move you in that right direction. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but
it raises a lot of interesting things I think about a lot. I mean, how much of it in the end do you think is just loneliness, isolation, just people need each other and they don't just need each other around. They need each other like in such a deep way. And our society is just set up in a way where the person who I had, the person who in our society, it made sense for me to go and have those talks and do that thing that was so important with, was a therapist. And on the one hand, that's great because she's not just anybody. She was somebody who dedicated her life to playing this helpful role in our society. And it's like her whole life's been about trying to gain this wisdom. And now I'm in need of it. And so I go to her, and it's like, this is how it's supposed to be. But then on the other hand, I think, is there some big it's almost like this is the problems we have are too. Some people have claimed that I'm anti-AA because I'm telling people that I think that this naltrexone thing has been neglected and that the one-size-fits-all model that often gets used of 12 steps in AA is it just hasn't proved as effective as the world we could have. And I try to tell them, I'm so not anti-AA that I actually want more AA-like things in society. I want support groups I just want a reason to get together with people and be confessional and to admit that we don't have it all figured out, and then to be there for each other, hugging each other. I think that that's really important. And it comes to this big mystery I have that goes, it's a very big question I'm not going to be able to articulate too coherently here, but it's that big societal level mystery of like, what the heck's going on? Where if you look in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2000 teens, somehow we're in the 2020s, right? Over that spectrum of time, each decade, there's been less social stigma around seeing a mental health professional. There have been more access to mental health care professionals. There have been more and more medications. There have been insurance plans that now cover this. All these things they're all moving in this direction. And so you'd think with all this, like with all the reinforcements coming, you'd think that we're going to see a huge drop in mental health problems. And we're seeing the opposite. And that I don't understand. And I think that, the people who look at the correlation causation thing, they might go, well, it's their fault, right? There's a crowd out there. I've met them,
Right.
This is just one big hustle and none of it works. And I don't think that that's true. I think that something is happening in our society that's really, really big. And it's bigger. Like, we're not going to be able to just telehealth our way through this. There's something going on really big.
I agree with you, and it'll be interesting to see that. I often wonder if it's the way in which we communicate now, the different ways in which we have human connection. I mean, I think people are starving for that. They're starving for feeling connected to others in a safe way. In a way where their nervous system isn't activated, when we look at like polyvagal theory and all of that stuff, when we're in that, we're in the nervous system where we can be social and connect and stuff. But there's so much, at the same time, there's so much threat out there, and threat that comes from us all different directions with all the information that we're getting all the time. I always wonder, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but is that impacting this unconscious stressor of like, everything is changing so fast. Yeah. And we're not adapted to do that. And we're not adapted to how we communicate in modern times. And so we have a higher sense of loneliness and a higher sense of threat. And so it's more difficult to connect. We have to actually really manufacture, if that makes sense. I mean, that sounds artificial, but manufacture connection. We have to consciously really work to do it in our society, connect with other human beings in our life and have those people in our life that we actively nurture. And I see that, in addiction treatment when people are really getting better, whether they're using naltrexone or other medications, doesn't matter, right? Like, sometimes those medications help get them where they can get to this point, where they can get to a point where they can make human connection with others, right? If you have so much anxiety, you can't connect with another person. You're in your anxiety. If you're so depressed, you can't connect with others, right? If you're so, all of these things come back and forth, and they hobble that core piece of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Which is connection at the end of the day. That's what we all want. It's what we all need. And we get locked in all these things.
People ask me sometimes, what, do you miss when you were a fundamentalist Christian? And like I said, there's parts of it I never miss. I don't miss the burden of thinking everyone goes to hell. I thought most Christians went to hell because they weren't the right kind of Christians, Duane.
Yeah. No, I understand.
Every other religion, plus lots of my own religion, they're all going to hell unless they, convert and believe what I believe. That's no way to live. And I never miss that. But this thing you're talking about, the church was that for me in my formative years. I can't imagine not having had church and the people and the beliefs and the values and the intimacy and the stories and this idea that I was loved, knit together in the womb. I'll get choked up just thinking about it. Like, it was so important to have that. And we haven't, as a society, I'm not the only one who's not doing that anymore, right? So many kids are raised without any version of that. And I can't be a hypocrite and say, oh, you should raise them in the church, because I wouldn't do it. But we need something. We need we got rid of the thing without replacing the thing. And I think a lot of it does come down to that. And I'm not about like, let's go back to, there's no going back. That's not how the world works, right? But we can learn, I think, from social movements. And one of the social movements happening right in front of our nose right now, not just in America, it's happening in Europe and happening elsewhere, is that if you're going to step away from these institutions and their beliefs because you find that they're not working for you, they're not flourishing the society the way that you want, they're not, that's great. But think about what you're leaving when you leave that. And because if you don't choose, if you don't like make conscious decisions, right? This is your manufacturing idea. Like, if you aren't active in choosing what is the center of your life, what are your foundational beliefs, what is your life's purpose, what social experiences you want to have, if you don't actively choose those things, they're still going to happen. You've just taken your hands off the wheel and you're just going, I ask people all the time, like what is your life? What would you say your life's about? And they're like, I don't know. And I was like, here's a good equation. What do you spend most of your time doing? Because that is actually your life. Your life is what you give your time to and what values you try as imperfectly as you will to live out, come what may. Like that is our lives. And I it was easier with the church. It just was. There was a structure, there's a book, there's songs, some of them so great. I miss the hymns. I definitely miss the hymns. Right. And we're moving to structureless. And so if we're not careful, the structure becomes the TikTok algorithm, the Instagram Reels algorithm. We fall into that structure. We fall into the structure of our like work and then entertain myself and maybe drink myself to sleep and then work and then entertain myself and then drink myself. Like that just becomes the rhythm of your life.
I wonder, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, part of becoming, this is my opinion, but part of becoming like fully human is understanding both the positive and negatives of who we are and the good and the bad in our personhood. And I wonder also, like what you're saying too, in some of these spaces of connection, even like in the 12-step or the church or wherever it is you're going, is a growing up of being able to own the parts that maybe aren't the best part of it and being able to change those to the better or to cope with them so we can still have that really good part of that connection that happens. But I think that's a maturity I think we grow into. I think we can grow into it individually. And I hope as a culture, as a world, humanity is also maybe trying to grow into that as well. I'm a little bit of an optimist, but what else is there, right?
Yeah, you got it. Why not?
What else is why not? So
we need you to be an optimist. I know. I share that hope. We've gotten through so much as a species.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I think that it's tempting to think that no, we're the generation that's really got it bad. It's like pick up a history book.
Yeah. What was so going back a little bit to crafting this episode and making it? I mean, what was the most profound part for you? I mean, we're talking about these big things questions that this generates, but I'm just wondering as you're listening and you're putting this together and you're editing it and you're putting the story together, what was the moment that touched you the most?
Well, obviously the moment that touched me the most is when my friend Katie, who is often sarcastic, hilarious. She has a very cold front that she puts up as a part of the shtick of her public life and a little bit on occasion in private, where she was so moved when describing getting her life back, finally finding freedom from the years and years of this addiction. And it moved her and it moved me. And so that was the most moving part. The most interesting part in the putting it together and this maybe is too inside baseball, but since I know that you studied radio, television, broadcasting in your past, maybe you'll forgive a little inside baseball. But I'm a very iterative producer, editor. I build it long, fill it up with all the interesting stuff, and then I go like almost like a sculptor, like, okay, what can we lose? What's too much? What did I just add in there because I like it, but the listener doesn't really need it? And I pull away. Each draft gets often smaller and smaller and smaller. And originally, the opener for this episode was about Ozempic and how it's very difficult to lose weight. We know now that this compulsion to overeat is not just about self-control. Yeah. There's something going on. There is so much shame that people go through when they failed for the fourth time to keep their diet, the exercise. It's so hard to lose weight. And suddenly Ozempic is like, oh, this will help. Now, doesn't come without some side effects, but this thing will work, and it'll work fast. And it's like, wow. And this is bringing all this attention. And I thought, okay, with all this attention on Ozempic, let's like re-examine these medications that are used for another thing that's associated with shame. And then it also ends with like, okay, if we're living through the Ozempic moment, might the Ozempic moment breed a naltrexone moment or an anabuse moment or whatever? But as I made drafts, I thought to myself, but the more drafts I made, the more I was like, I don't think I need to talk about Ozempic. It's in the air, it's in the ether. And it's been interesting since I've shared the episode. A lot of people have said to me, it reminded me of Ozempic. And I was like, oh, great.
There you go. You nailed it. Yeah.
Well, but it is just that we're talking when you try to pay close attention, right? This is the thing that I want to do as a storyteller, as a journalist. It's just like, there's too much reactionary stuff happening in the world. My profession, journalism, has struggled since the advent of social media. We're going through a little bit of a yellow journalism revival where scandal and hyperbole are taking charge. And I want to do my part to help course correct and say, like, instead of reacting, let's reflect, right? That's why the show's called Reflector. And when you reflect it, the idea is to just pay close attention to something. And when you do, you start to see that it's full of all these other things, right? This addiction is full of a story about shame. It's full of a story about social norms. It's full of all these it's pregnant with so much that you wouldn't see if you were just trying to go for a knee-jerk quick reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That's I loved it. It's a great episode, and I just love her just that moment where she shares that piece of how, she feels that freedom. Mm-hmm. It is such a powerful moment in the episode, but it speaks to the desperation of so many people out there. And if there's a possibility that, this can work for them, I mean, it's like, you've got to investigate it. You've got to look, because maybe this will help you get to that space where you feel connected again to yourself and to others. So that was a powerful moment.
Yeah. Thank you.
And hard to be able to see all, to contain it because you're right. It brings all these things. Addiction is such a bigger issue than just the substance itself. It's all of these things. It's all of the concepts of self and morality and willpower and who am I and what am I and all of that stuff. So it's a powerful topic.
And you know what? We get this one life to live. And I just think thinking deeply, looking deeply, it's just a better way to live. It's better than the scroll. Everything that Reflector is this new podcast. It's a co-creation of me and my dear friend Matthew Bowl, a longtime collaborator, and everything that we do, it's always a team effort. So all your compliments you pay to me, you're also paying to him, and I'll be sure to forward them his way. But he and I have this motto where we talk about listening is greater than scrolling. Like, we're trying to make this a thing.
Right.
Like, do you even remember what reels you saw 2 days ago? No, but
exactly.
But this story, it'll stick with you, and it'll feed you, and that's our goal each episode. So.
It's awesome. All right. We're about coming up on our time, but I'd like to ask every guest a question just before we leave. Someone out there's listening, right? And maybe they're in that space of self-doubt, pain, hurt, loss, addiction, whatever. And you could tell them one thing, and you want them to know. What would you want them to know? What would you want to tell them?
I mean, I'm thinking about two things. One of them I'm thinking about is my own personal experience where, the darkest phase I ever fell into oddly happened in such a small, mundane way. And I was kind of embarrassed to be so sad about it.
Mm-hmm.
I had just come back from Iraq, and the horrors that I witnessed there, they should have been what bummed me out.
Mm-hmm.
I saw death. I was on the front lines. I met these women who had been held as sex slaves by ISIS, and I wept with them, and I, as a reporter, tried to bear witness to all the tragedies that I saw. And you'd think, okay, so he went through a tough time. It must have been about that. It wasn't that. I was sad about a girl. And then I was embarrassed because then I became ashamed. Like, how dare I be more sad about this breakup? I must be a horrible person that my own self-pity about this tough breakup makes me sadder than that horrible stuff. I have such a good life. I get caught up to saying, I was like, how dare I be this sad?
Oh.
And I think that I wasted weeks feeling that way. I should have just right away. So what I would say to people is it doesn't matter if it's stupid. What's making you sad? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
All that matters is that you embrace reality, that yes, you are that sad. And if you are in a really, really tough spot, don't do this alone. Seek some kind of help. Don't be embarrassed. It's tough enough to live life with the pains of life. Don't add embarrassed on top of it. We're all struggling. Everyone's in their own version all the time. And there's no reason to be embarrassed. And you don't have to concoct some big story. I was tempted to say, well, if I pretend this is about Iraq, then people will be like, well, what a brave guy. Yeah, it's so tough going over there to Iraq. I was tempted. But actually, no, the bigger problem I had was that I was heartbroken. And for some reason, it was hitting me. It was just hitting me in a way that was so devastating that I had to go seek those tools.
Yeah. Well, that's what it means to be human, right? That's our humanity, the compassion for that experience. I'm glad that you were able to get support for that and find your way through that. What a powerful share and lesson for people out there. What a gift to give them.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me and having me. And
where can people find this?
Yeah, so if you listen to podcasts, which you might be doing right now, actually, if you pull out whatever device you're currently using and look for Reflector, this episode is called The Sea Change. It's our first episode. We've got another episode coming out in a week, and we try to publish every few weeks. We've just begun, so be patient as we try and get these very ambitious episodes out there. But if you want to know more, you can go to reflector.show. That's our website.
Awesome. I'll put all the links in the show notes as well at theaddictedmind.com so people can check it out.
I appreciate that, Duane. And I appreciate all that you do.
Thank you for coming on, Andy.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Addicted Mind podcast. As usual, all the links will be in the show notes at theaddictedmind.com. There you can find a link to the Reflector podcast and the episode, The Sea Change. Definitely encourage you to listen to that. I think it's a great episode, and I think it really brings up a lot of important information. I was so glad to have Andy on the podcast to share his story of creating this episode and putting this information out there. So check that out at theaddictedmind.com. And if you got a lot out of this episode, please share it with a friend. And don't forget, you can follow us on Instagram at Addicted Mind Podcast. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.